The wind howled through the valley like a wild animal. Snow came down in thick white sheets, hiding the trail that wound through the tall pines. The world had turned white, endless and silent except for the sound of the storm. A young woman moved slowly through the snow, her thin coat soaked through, her shoes breaking apart with every step. Her name was Clara, and she had been walking for hours, maybe all day. Her fingers were numb, her face pale, her breath coming out in little clouds. She was trying to reach the next town, but she had long lost the road. The storm had swallowed everything. Her last memory before the storm was the broken stagecoach. It had tipped near the river, the driver yelling as the horses bolted into the trees. The few passengers had scattered, each trying to save themselves. Clara had been left behind when she couldn't keep up. She shouted for help, but no one turned back. She had carried a small bag with a few clothes and an old locket, but she had dropped it somewhere in the snow. Now she had nothing. No food, no warmth, no direction. Only the will to keep walking. The wind grew stronger, cutting her face like small blades of ice. Her steps slowed. Her feet ached and the cold crawled deep into her bones. She stumbled and fell into the snow, her breath catching. For a moment she wanted to close her eyes and rest. It would be so easy to sleep. But then she saw it. A faint orange glow far up the slope through the swirling white. A light, a cabin maybe, a person. Anything but this empty cold. She forced herself to stand and began to move again. One step at a time, slipping and falling, getting up again. Her heart beat weakly in her chest. She whispered to herself, "Just a little more, Clara. Just a little more." By the time she reached the cabin door, her legs were trembling. The light came from a small window, the glass fogged from warmth inside. She lifted her frozen hand and knocked, barely making a sound. For a moment there was nothing. Then the door opened. A tall figure filled the doorway, shadowed by the light from the fire behind him. He was huge, broad as the doorframe, with a thick beard and shoulders that looked carved from stone. His name was Jonas Hale, though she didn't know it yet. He had lived alone in these mountains for years, far from towns and people. His eyes were dark and calm, the eyes of someone who had seen too much and spoken too little. He looked at her for a long second, as if unsure if she was real. Then he stepped aside and said in a quiet voice, "Come in." Clara staggered inside, the warmth hitting her like a wave. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and pine. A small fire burned in the stone hearth, throwing light across the rough wooden walls. She tried to speak, but her lips could barely move. Jonas closed the door behind her and moved to a shelf, taking down a heavy fur blanket. Without a word, he draped it over her shoulders. Her teeth chattered as she clutched it close. "You'll freeze if you stay in those clothes," he said. His voice was deep but gentle. "Sit by the fire." She sat on the floor near the flames, trying to stop shaking. Her eyes followed him as he moved around the room. He was quiet, almost careful in how he did things. He poured something from a pot into a bowl and handed it to her. "Stew," he said. "Eat slow." The smell made her stomach ache with hunger. She ate quickly, spoon after spoon, barely tasting it, just needing something warm inside her. When she finished, he handed her a tin cup of water and said, "There's more if you want." When she could finally speak, her voice was small. "I'm sorry. I had nowhere else to go. I didn't mean to bother you." Jonas shook his head. "You didn't," he said. "The storm will get worse before morning. You stay here tonight," she nodded, still shaking. Then her fear returned. She was alone in a stranger's cabin miles from anywhere. A giant man stood a few feet away, quiet and unreadable. Her mind filled with all the stories she had heard about mountain men, rough, wild, and dangerous. She looked down and whispered, "I have nothing to pay you with." He didn't answer right away, and the silence made her chest tighten. Then she said the words before she could stop herself. "If you let me stay, I can give you something else. I can make it worth your while." Jonas froze. He turned to her slowly, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he just stared, the firelight flickering in his eyes. Then he said in a low, calm voice, "You don't owe me that." He turned back to the fire, picking up a piece of wood and setting it gently on the flames. "You don't need to give anything. You just need warmth." His tone was not angry, just sad, like a man tired of seeing people broken by the world. Clara felt her face burn with shame. She hadn't meant to say it. It had just come out, born of fear and desperation. She had been treated poorly by men before, men who took advantage when she was alone or hungry. She had learned to offer herself first before being forced. But Jonas's words struck something deep in her. She realized he wasn't like the others. She looked at him, this silent giant sitting by the fire with his head bowed slightly, and she saw kindness behind his roughness. He spoke again after a while. "There's a bed in the corner," he said quietly. "You sleep there. I'll sit by the fire." She looked at him, unsure, but he didn't look her way again. She stood still wrapped in the blanket and moved to the small bed covered in heavy quilts. She sank into it, the warmth and exhaustion finally catching up with her. She heard him moving slowly, the sound of the fire crackling, the wind outside shaking the shutters. As she lay there, her thoughts began to blur. She wanted to ask him his name, to thank him, to tell him how close she had been to dying in the snow. But sleep came faster than her words. Her last memory was of his voice, low and distant, saying something like, "Rest now. You're safe." The storm raged through the night, but inside the cabin there was peace. Jonas sat by the fire, watching the flames dance. He didn't sleep. He had lived alone for too long to trust easily, but something about the young woman stirred an old part of him, the part that once knew warmth, laughter, and family. He reached for the photograph on the mantel, a small faded picture of a woman and child. He looked at it for a long moment, then set it back and sighed. He didn't know who Clara was or why fate had brought her to his door, but he knew one thing: no one should freeze alone in the mountains. Outside, the wind began to slow. Snow still fell, but softer now, blanketing the cabin in silence. Inside, Clara slept deeply for the first time in months. The fur blanket rose and fell with her breath. The color slowly returned to her face. The faint smile that touched her lips was small but real. She dreamed of warmth, of safety, of a quiet man with gentle eyes who said she didn't owe him anything. When dawn finally came, the storm had stopped. The valley lay buried under white snow, sparkling in the new light. Smoke rose gently from the chimney. Inside, the fire still burned, and Jonas sat in his chair, half asleep, his eyes watching over the girl he had saved. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in years, the silence of the mountains didn't feel empty. When Clara opened her eyes the next morning, sunlight was spilling through the small window of the cabin. The storm was gone. The world outside was still white, but it looked calm now, soft and quiet. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The fur blanket was warm around her shoulders, and the sound of firewood crackling nearby made her feel safe. Then she saw Jonas sitting by the hearth, his big hands turning a piece of wood in the flames. He glanced toward her and nodded once. "You made it through the night," he said softly. Clara sat up, feeling a little dizzy. Her clothes were dry and folded neatly on the chair beside the bed. She noticed he had placed a mug of hot water with herbs near her pillow. "I warmed that for you earlier," he said. "Drink slow. It helps your throat." She took it carefully and sipped. It wasn't tea, but it was warm, and it soothed her. She studied him quietly. Jonas looked strong, built like a man who had worked hard all his life. His beard covered half his face, but his eyes were calm and tired, like he carried too many winters behind them. His cabin was simple, just one room with a stove, a table, a shelf full of tools, and a small corner where he slept. Everything was neat. There was no sign of anyone else living there. Clara felt shy and unsure. "I didn't thank you," she said. "You saved me from the storm. I don't know how to repay you." Jonas shook his head. "You don't owe me anything," he said again, his voice quiet but firm. "You were freezing. No one should be left out there." She smiled weakly, unsure what to say next. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines. She looked toward the window, the white sunlight reflecting off the snow. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Jonas nodded. "It is," he replied. "But it's not kind." He stood and moved toward the door, pulling on his thick coat. "I'm going to check the traps," he said. "Stay by the fire, you're still weak." She wanted to offer to help, but before she could, he had already stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Clara sat by the fire, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The cabin felt too quiet without him there. She looked around again, noticing little things she hadn't before. The tools were polished, the floor swept clean, the table made from rough pine but built strong. There were a few old books stacked, on the shelf and a picture in a wooden frame resting near the window. She stood and walked over. It showed a woman with soft eyes and a small child standing in front of a lake. The woman's smile was kind and gentle. Clara felt a strange ache in her chest. She didn't know who they were, but she could feel their absence in the air. Jonas returned after a while, his boots covered in snow. He placed a small bundle on the table. 2 rabbits, he said. We'll eat well today. Clara tried to smile. Can I help? She asked. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. You can peel the vegetables in the basket. The day passed quietly. She worked beside him, chopping carrots and potatoes while he prepared the meat for the stew. Neither spoke much, but the silence between them didn't feel heavy anymore. It was gentle, comfortable in a way she hadn't known in years. Every so often she caught him glancing at her as if making sure she was real. After dinner, when the firelight glowed warm across the room, Clara told him a little about herself. She said she had worked in a small inn back east before losing her job. She had been traveling with a cousin to find work out west when their stage broke down. He left when the road got bad, she said quietly. I thought I could make it alone. I was wrong. Jonas listened without interrupting. When she stopped, he nodded slowly. The mountain teaches fast, he said. It doesn't care who you are or where you come from. You either learn or you freeze. Clara looked at him. And you? How long have you been here? He didn't answer right away. His eyes rested on the picture by the window. Long enough, he finally said. She could see the pain in his face, the way his hand tightened slightly around the cup he was holding. She didn't ask more. Some silences didn't need to be broken. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm. The storm had buried the path, so leaving wasn't possible yet. Jonas showed her how to keep the fire burning through the night, how to melt snow for water, and how to tell when more weather was coming by the shape of the clouds. Clara watched and listened. She had never lived this kind of life before. Simple, hard, but strangely peaceful. She felt herself getting stronger each day. In the evenings, she helped him clean the cabin or prepare the meal. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. He had a deep, steady voice, the kind that made her feel calm. He never raised it, never rushed his words. He treated her not like a burden, but like someone who belonged there, at least for a while. One evening, while Jonas was outside chopping wood, Clara found an old coat folded in the corner. It was small, made for a woman. The edges were worn but clean. She touched it gently, realizing it must have belonged to the woman in the photograph. Her fingers trembled a little. She folded it carefully again and left it where it was. When Jonas came back inside, snow in his beard and hair, she asked quietly, "Was that your wife?" He froze, the question hanging between them. For a moment she thought she had said something wrong. Then he nodded once. "Yes," he said. "A long time ago." "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head. "You don't need to be. She and our boy, they got caught in an avalanche. I wasn't home. When I came back, the cabin was half buried." He stopped there, his voice rough. The firelight flickered against his face, showing years of pain carved deep into his expression. Clara didn't say anything. She just sat quietly, the silence saying more than words could. After a long moment, Jonas looked at her and gave a small nod, as if to thank her for not asking more. He stood, poured himself a little water, and said softly, "That's why I stay here. It's quiet. The mountains don't judge. They just are." Later that night, when he thought she was asleep, Clara heard him moving softly, placing another blanket over her shoulders again. She didn't open her eyes, but she smiled a little. He was kind, though he tried to hide it behind his roughness. In the morning, she woke early and found him already outside, fixing a broken section of the fence near the shed. The sky was clear blue, the snow shining like silver in the sunlight. She went outside too, the cold air biting her cheeks but feeling fresh and clean. "You shouldn't be out long," Jonas said when he saw her. "You're still not used to the cold." "I'm stronger than I look," she replied with a small grin. He almost smiled then, just a tiny corner of his mouth lifting. Maybe so, he said. As days turned to a week, Clara began to feel like the cabin wasn't just a place she had been rescued to. It was becoming a home, even if it wasn't hers. She cleaned the windows, cooked when she could, and even mended one of his old shirts. Jonas didn't say much, but each time he saw something she had done, he gave a quiet nod like he was letting her know he noticed. One evening, while they sat by the fire, Clara looked at him and said softly, "I'll be gone soon, won't I?" Jonas stared into the flames. "When the pass opens, I'll take you to town," he said. His voice was steady, but there was something heavy in it. She nodded, pretending not to feel the small ache in her chest. "Thank you for everything." He looked at her then, really looked, and said, "You don't need to thank me. You just needed a chance to live." That night, Clara lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind outside, wondering why the thought of leaving made her heart feel heavier than the storm ever had. The days passed slowly in the mountains. The snow began to settle deeper, but the sunlight grew stronger each morning. Smoke rose from the chimney each day, showing that life continued in the quiet cabin among the tall trees. Clara woke earlier now, no longer weak from cold or hunger. She had grown used to the rhythm of the place, the sound of the fire in the morning, the crunch of Jonas's boots outside, the smell of pine wood and stew filling the air by evening. Every day felt peaceful but strange. She wasn't sure if it was home, but it was something close. She didn't talk much about her past anymore. Jonas never asked. He was a man who understood silence, and somehow that silence healed her more than any words could. One morning, as the sun rose over the ridge, Clara stepped outside. The snow sparkled under the golden light. Her breath came out in soft clouds, and her cheeks turned pink from the cold. Jonas was out near the shed, repairing the roof that had cracked under the storm's weight. She walked over, her boots crunching in the snow. "Can I help?" she asked, smiling shyly. He looked down from the ladder, his thick gloves holding a wooden plank. "You can hand me the nails," he said simply. She did. They worked side by side for hours, not saying much, but every now and then their eyes met. Each time, Clara felt something quiet but strong pass between them. Respect, trust, maybe something deeper that neither dared name. After the work was done, Jonas sat on the steps, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're learning fast," he said. "Most folks wouldn't last a week up here." Clara laughed softly. "I didn't think I'd last one night," she admitted. "But now, I don't know. It feels different here, safe." Jonas nodded but said nothing. He stared at the mountains ahead, their snowy peaks glowing in the sunlight. "The mountain has a way of showing what matters," he said at last. They sat together for a while in silence. The wind moved through the pines and a hawk circled high above. Clara watched Jonas, noticing the lines on his face, the tiredness in his eyes, and yet the calm strength that surrounded him. She wanted to ask him how he had lived so long alone, how he hadn't gone mad from loneliness, but when she looked at him, she understood. He wasn't truly alone. The mountain, the trees, the wind, and the memories of his family were always with him. That evening, as they sat by the fire, she caught sight of that same photograph again, the woman and the little boy. The faces looked alive in the flickering light. She hesitated, but then spoke softly. "Your wife looks kind," she said. "Your boy, too." Jonas's eyes flicked toward the picture. "They were," he said quietly. His voice held no anger, only sadness. The boy's name was Luke. He loved the snow. He used to chase it, try to catch the flakes on his tongue. A faint smile touched his face, but it faded fast. "It's been many winters since then." Clara lowered her gaze. "You must miss them." "I do," he said simply. "Every day." The silence that followed was heavy but gentle. Clara didn't try to fill it. She simply watched the fire and listened to it crackle. Then Jonas stood, poured her another cup of tea, and said softly, "It's good to have someone else here again, even just to talk to the walls less." She smiled, warmed by the quiet honesty in his words. That night, she lay awake long after he had gone still by the fire. The snow had started again outside, tiny flakes tapping gently on the window. She thought about her life before the storm, all the running, the fear, the coldness of people's hearts. Then she thought about this man who had given her a home without asking for anything. He didn't look for reward or thanks. He simply helped because he couldn't walk away from someone in need. The next morning, Clara decided to give something back. While Jonas was outside checking his traps, she began to clean the cabin deeply. She swept the floor, washed the dishes, and even fixed a torn curtain using a bit of thread she found. She cooked soup with what was left from yesterday's stew, and added some herbs from the small box Jonas kept near the window. By the time he came back inside, the cabin looked brighter and smelled of fresh bread. Jonas stopped in the doorway, surprised. "You did all this?" Clara smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I thought maybe you'd like to come home to something warm for a change." For the first time since she'd met him, Jonas actually smiled, a full, real smile that changed his whole face. "You didn't have to," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but you didn't have to save me either." They sat down to eat, and the air between them felt different, lighter, almost happy. It was a feeling Clara hadn't known in a long time. After they finished, Jonas leaned back and said, "You're stronger now. When the past clears, I can take you down to town. You'll find a place to stay, maybe work." Her spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. "Oh," she said softly. "Yes, of course." He looked at her, noticing the small change in her face. "It's safer there," he said almost gently. She nodded but didn't speak again. That night she stood by the window for a long time looking at the moonlit snow. Her heart felt heavy. The thought of leaving the cabin, leaving him, made her chest ache. She didn't understand why. He was quiet, rough, sometimes distant. But he had been the only person in years who had treated her with simple kindness. A few days later, a pair of travelers came up the mountain. Jonas saw them first, their figures small against the white path. They were hunters passing through, heading toward the valley. Clara stayed by the door while Jonas spoke to them outside. Their voices carried faintly through the cold air. She could hear one of them say, "Road's clearing down south. Folks will be moving again soon." When Jonas came back in, he hung his coat and said, "The trail will be open in a few days." Clara's heart sank. She smiled weakly and said, "That's good news." He nodded, not looking at her. He seemed to be lost in thought. The next morning, he gave her a small pair of boots he had fixed with leather straps. "You'll need these for the trip down," he said. She held them, unsure whether to thank him or cry. "Jonas," she said finally, "when I leave, will you be all right here alone again?" He paused, then said, "I've been alone most of my life. I'll manage." His words were steady, but something in his eyes betrayed a quiet sadness. That evening, Clara couldn't sleep. The sound of the fire comforted her, but her thoughts kept turning. She imagined herself walking down the trail, the cabin getting smaller and smaller behind her. She imagined reaching the town, full of people, noise, and faces that wouldn't know her name. The idea of it made her feel cold again, the same kind of cold she had felt that night in the storm. The next morning, she helped Jonas carry wood to the shed. As they worked, the silence between them grew thick with unspoken words. Finally, Clara stopped and said quietly, "You've done so much for me, Jonas, I don't know how to thank you." He looked at her for a long time, then said softly, "You already did. You stayed." Her throat tightened and she had to look away. Later that day, she found him sitting outside staring at the peaks beyond the valley. She walked over and sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. The air was crisp and the sky was deep blue. Then Jonas said in a low voice, "The world is full of people who take more than they give. You reminded me there are still people who care." Clara turned to look at him. "You reminded me there are still people who help without wanting anything back." Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither could speak. The mountains stood tall around them, the wind soft and cold. In that quiet, something passed between them again. Not love spoken aloud, not promises made, just a silent understanding that whatever happened next, they would never forget each other. The snow began to melt slowly and the days grew longer. Sunlight spilled over the mountains in the early morning, making the snow glisten like a blanket of diamonds. Birds sang in the trees and the frozen streams began to flow again with clear, cold water. The mountains were changing and Clara noticed it with a mix of excitement and sadness. The storm was over, and the path to the valley would soon be clear. That meant she could leave the cabin, leave Jonas, and find her way back to the world beyond the mountains. For the first time, the thought of leaving made her heart ache. She had come to care for the quiet, giant man who had saved her life. His rough exterior hid a kindness and strength that she had never known in other people. She wanted to tell him how much it meant to her, how much she had changed in these past weeks. But words always failed her when she tried. Jonas had been quiet too, though more thoughtful than usual. He worked around the cabin, repairing broken boards, checking his traps, and gathering firewood. He moved with the same careful strength she had noticed from the first night. But lately, Clara had noticed him glancing at her more often, as if he was measuring something. Her strength, her presence, her place in his life. He never spoke about it, and she didn't push. Silence between them had become comfortable, and she didn't want to break it with questions or fears. One morning, Jonas hitched his mule to the sled. "The pass should be open in a day or two," he said simply. Clara felt her stomach tighten. She tried to smile. "Yes," she said softly. He looked at her, studying her face for a long moment. "You've learned much in these weeks," he said. "You'll do well on your own." Clara nodded, but she couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. I don't know where I'll go exactly," she admitted. "You'll find your way," he said firmly. "You've survived the storm. You'll survive the world." The next few hours were spent preparing the sled. Jonas packed blankets, food, and some supplies for her journey. Clara moved around quietly, helping where she could. Every time she looked at him, she felt a warmth in her chest, a feeling she couldn't name. The way he worked, steady and calm, gave her hope, made her feel safe. Yet the thought of leaving him made her chest tighten as if the snowstorm had returned inside her heart. That evening, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames, listening to the crackle and pop of burning wood. Jonas was outside, moving softly among the trees, tending to the firewood. She could see his figure in the moonlight, strong and silent, as he lifted logs and stacked them carefully. She wished she could find words to tell him how much she appreciated everything he had done for her. Finally, she stood and walked outside, her boots crunching in the melting snow. Jonas looked up when she approached. "You're outside late," he said, though he didn't sound surprised. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. I don't want to leave." He set down the log he was holding and turned to look at her fully. The moonlight shone on his face, showing the deep lines and the tired eyes. "Clara," he said softly, "you don't have to go if you don't want. You can stay here. I won't ask anything of you." Her heart raced. She had not expected him to say that. "Stay, but you've been alone for so long. I can't ask you to change your life for me." He shook his head. "It's not a change. It's sharing it. You're already here. You're already part of this place in some way. If you want to stay, that's your choice. Not payment, not obligation, just choice." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She had offered herself weeks ago, desperate and frightened, thinking that was the only way to be allowed to live, and he had refused it. He had never asked for anything, had never taken advantage. He had given her warmth, shelter, kindness, and dignity when the world had given her none. And now he was offering her more, the choice to remain in this quiet, safe place. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She thought about her old life, about towns she didn't know, about strangers she might meet, and the cold and loneliness she had always carried with her. Then she thought about Jonas, the cabin, the fire, the mountains, the soft rhythm of the days they had shared. Her heart felt full and heavy at the same time. I want to stay," she whispered finally. Jonas looked at her, his face softening in a way that made her heart skip a beat. "Then stay," he said simply. "No one will ask you to do more than you can. No one will ask you to give anything but yourself, if you want to." Clara nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. The fear, the loneliness, the endless running meant it was all behind her now. She realized she could finally rest, that she had found a place where she belonged. The following days passed in quiet joy. Clara learned to help more efficiently around the cabin. She chopped wood beside him, fetched water from the stream, and learned how to prepare meals that were simple but nourishing. Jonas watched her quietly, giving small nods when she did well, small smiles when she struggled and then succeeded. She noticed the moments he looked at her lingered just a bit longer than necessary, and she felt warmth in her chest every time it happened. One morning, as the sun rose over the valley, Jonas led her to the small garden he had cleared last summer. "I want you to see something," he said. He handed her a small spade and showed her how to turn the soil, how to plant seeds evenly. Clara followed his instructions carefully. "It's your choice what to plant," he said. "It's your garden, too." She looked at him in surprise. "Mine?" "Yes," he said quietly. "You stay here. You can plant. You can grow. You can make this place your own if you want." Clara smiled, a real bright smile that warmed Jonas's heart. She bent over the soil and began planting seeds, feeling life returning to her hands in a way she hadn't felt before. Each small action, each turn of the soil, each seed planted, felt like a promise of a new life. Evenings became their favorite time. They would sit by the fire, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about simple things. The way snow melts on the branches, the sound of the stream, the birds that had returned to the trees. Clara found herself laughing softly, enjoying his rare smiles and quiet chuckles. She learned more about him, not the tragedies, not the hard past, but the little things he cared for, the way he measured the days, the way he tended to the cabin like it was alive. Jonas, in turn, seemed to change too. He was gentler, more patient, less distant. She could see him looking at her with admiration, though never saying it aloud. He didn't need to. The quiet connection between them spoke more than words ever could. One evening, as the sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Clara finally spoke the words she had been holding in her heart. "Jonas, thank you. For everything. For letting me stay, for being kind." He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "You don't need to thank me," he said softly. "I saved you because it was right. I let you stay because it feels right." Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him that he had given her life, warmth, and hope, that she had never felt so safe and cared for, but the words seemed too large for her mouth. Instead, she simply nodded. The mountains were quiet now, the storm long gone. The snow was melting into the streams, the sunlight shining on the cabin, and the world felt full of possibilities. Clara knew that whatever the future held, she had found a place where she belonged, where she was safe and where she was valued for who she was. And beside her, the quiet giant with the kind heart sat watching the fire, as if he understood without words, and as if he too had found something he hadn't known he was missing. Spring arrived fully in the mountains. The snow had melted almost completely, leaving soft green moss and small wildflowers peeking through the soil. Streams ran freely again, sparkling in the sunlight. The cabin that had been a refuge in the storm now stood in a quiet clearing, warm and welcoming. Clara moved around it with a sense of peace she had never known before. The mornings were calm, the air fresh, and the sounds of the mountains, birds, streams, the gentle rustle of trees, and filled her heart with quiet joy. She woke early that morning, as she had for weeks now, and watched Jonas step outside to tend to the garden they had planted together. The seeds they had sown had begun to sprout, small green shoots breaking through the soil. Clara smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She had never imagined that she could grow something, nurture something, and see it thrive. She realized then that she had grown too. Jonas noticed her watching and gave her a small nod. "Good morning," he said. His voice was low, steady, but carried a warmth that made her smile. "The garden looks better than I expected." "It's because of you," Clara replied softly. "You taught me how to care for it." "No," he said, shaking his head, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You did it yourself. I just showed you the way." The day passed quietly with simple tasks and shared laughter. Clara learned more about the mountains and how to live among them. She chopped wood with more strength and precision than she had thought possible. She fetched water from the stream and carried it back without tiring as quickly. She prepared meals and even baked small loaves of bread using Jonas's old recipes. The cabin was filled with warmth, the kind that comes from work done well and shared with someone you care about. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Clara and Jonas sat together outside the cabin. The air was soft now, carrying the scent of earth and flowers. Clara turned to Jonas and spoke quietly, almost hesitant. "Jonas, I don't know how to say this, but thank you for saving me, for letting me stay, for everything." Jonas looked at her, his face calm but his eyes showing a depth of feeling he rarely revealed. "You don't need to thank me," he said simply. "I only did what felt right." "I know," Clara said, smiling softly. "But it's more than that. You gave me a home. You gave me hope. You gave me a life I never thought I could have." Jonas didn't speak for a long moment. He reached over and rested a large hand gently on hers. Then stay, he said quietly. Not because you owe me anything, but because you want to. If this place, this life feels right for you, then stay. I would like that. Clara's heart swelled. She had offered herself once, desperate and afraid, thinking that was the only way to survive, and he had refused. Now he was offering her something far greater, a choice, freedom, and a place where she belonged. Tears came to her eyes, but she smiled through them. I want to stay, she whispered. Jonas nodded, and for the first time the full weight of his emotions seemed to show in his eyes. There was relief, happiness, and a quiet joy that had been missing from his life for years. The mountains around them were silent witnesses to this moment, the snow long gone, the air filled with the promise of life and renewal. The following days were filled with simple routines, shared work, and quiet companionship. Clara helped Jonas with everything he did, from mending fences to tending the garden. They worked side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about small things, the way the sunlight hit the peaks, the sound of the stream, or the birds that returned each morning. Every glance, every small gesture carried unspoken meaning. Clara began to feel a deep connection, a sense of belonging that she had never experienced before. One morning, as they worked in the garden together, Jonas paused and looked at her. Clara, he said, his voice steady but soft, you've changed this place and you've changed me too. Clara looked up surprised. Me? Yes, he said, a small smile playing on his lips. You've brought warmth, laughter, and life back into these mountains. I didn't realize how quiet, how lonely it had become without someone to share it with. You've made it better. You've made it home. Her heart leapt at his words. She had always feared being alone, feared that no one could ever care for her. Yet here was a man who had cared for her without expecting anything in return, who had given her safety, kindness, and now friendship, trust, and love. She reached out and took his hand. And you've given me more than I can ever say, she whispered. Jonas squeezed her hand gently. Then we're even, he said with a quiet laugh. Spring deepened and the garden grew. Small vegetables sprouted, flowers bloomed, and the cabin became a place of life and warmth. Clara tended to the garden with care, feeling a sense of purpose and pride. Jonas worked beside her, teaching her small tricks of the trade, sharing stories of his life in the mountains and listening quietly to her own stories of the past. Evenings became their favorite time. They would sit by the fire talking softly or simply enjoying the warmth and light. Clara realized she had never felt so safe, so content, and so truly herself. Jonas had shown her that life could be kind, even when it seemed impossible. He had shown her that home was not just a place, but a feeling, a place where she was valued, cared for, and loved. One evening, as the sun set and the mountains glowed in orange and purple, Clara turned to Jonas and said softly, I've never felt this way before. I never knew life could be this full, this kind. He looked at her, his large hands folded over his knees. It can be, he said quietly. You just have to find it. And sometimes it finds you when you least expect it. Clara smiled, a full smile that reached her eyes. I think it found me. Jonas's eyes softened and he nodded. It did. The days that followed were filled with small joys. Tending the garden, preparing meals, exploring the mountains together. Clara no longer feared the cold, the loneliness, or the unknown. She had found warmth, safety, and companionship in Jonas. And he had found someone to share his life with. Someone who brought light back into the cabin and the mountains. As the sun rose one morning, Clara and Jonas stood outside looking at the peaks bathed in golden light. Birds sang, the streams ran freely, and the world felt alive. Jonas took Clara's hand in his. You've made this place better, he said softly. And you've made me better too. Clara squeezed his hand, feeling a deep sense of peace. And you've given me everything I ever needed, she whispered. For a long moment they stood together in silence, looking at the mountains and the life they had built. The past, the storms, the fears, all of it felt distant now. What mattered was this place, this time, and the quiet understanding and love that had grown between them. Jonas finally spoke, his voice low but steady. You don't owe me anything, Clara, you never did. You only needed to survive, and now you have a home. You have a choice, and I'm grateful you chose to stay. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. She smiled, leaning slightly against his shoulder. I'm grateful too, she said softly. The mountains stood silent around them. The snow melted into clear streams, the air warm and gentle. The cabin glowed softly in the evening light, a home built from care, trust, and shared life. Clara had found safety, warmth, and belonging. Jonas had found companionship, love, and a reason to keep moving forward, and so life continued in the mountains. Days filled with work, quiet moments by the fire, laughter, and the simple beauty of nature. Clara and Jonas lived together in the cabin, learning from each other, growing together and finding in each other the peace and joy they had been seeking. They had survived the storm and in doing so, had found each other, and in that discovery, they had found everything they needed. The seasons would come and go, but the cabin remained a place of safety, love, and warmth. Clara had offered herself once out of desperation, but Jonas had shown her that kindness and care were far stronger than fear. She had learned that true strength came not from surviving alone, but from trusting, sharing, and choosing to stay. And Jonas, the quiet giant of the mountains, had learned that even a life of solitude could be brightened by someone who truly belonged. Together they built a life that was simple, peaceful, and full of love. A life neither had expected, but one they would cherish forever.